So after investing in well over 100 companies at this point through my fund as well as like my own angel investments personally, I thought it'd be fun to share some of like my favorite portfolio companies that I've invested in over the years. And today I wanted to talk about this company called Carta. Now, most people haven't heard of Carta unless you're in the startup ecosystem, because like they're not like a consumer products company. They're more like enterprise software. And specifically what Carta does is they help companies manage their capitalization table. Now, a capitalization table is simply like this document that outlines all of the people that own shares in the company. And if you think about, a typical company that's like issuing all these options to all of their employees, and then some of those options are being vested and some of them are being exercised, and then you have investors investing, and they're investing like preferred shares, preferred series A, preferred series B, C, et cetera, et cetera. Like a cap table can get very complex very quickly. And then you need a way to like manage all of that. And then there's also like this question of the shares. So for like a long time, when I first started in venture, we would get like physical copies of shares, and it'd be like, university, blah, blah, blah fund, 565,000 shares at this like share price, blah, blah, blah. And we get like this physical certificate. And then we just like, I would put it in the safe. And then like technically we were supposed to like mail it back in when the company went public or got acquired or whatever. And like sometimes that happened, sometimes it did. I mean, it was kind of a mess. And so e-shares years ago, that's what Carta used to be called, was e-shares. They were like, hey, we're going to take all these certificates and we're going to hold them in custody and digitize them effectively. And that was their pitch. And I remember at the time thinking like, is that really like that big of a market? And just wasn't like super impressed or super interested. And, look, sometimes VCs, a lot of the time VCs are just wrong, right? Like I was wrong because I didn't really understand like the full story of what e-shares was trying to do and what Carta was trying to do until much later. So fast forward, the company pivots the brand, changes it from eShares to Carta. They are quickly becoming like the number one place for companies to manage their cap table and all of the shares that they have with their employees. They made it like really easy. They made it like the obvious go-to place to do that. And we looked at investing in their Series C round alongside Social Capital. Like if I have any fans of Chamath over at the All In podcast, Social Capital is his fund. So we were looking at that. We ended up investing alongside them. And the reason that we invested was because we realized like it's not just about managing a cap table and providing software for that. That's like step one of this 12-step master plan, Elon Musk style. And so here's the big plan, and like this is all outlined in public, so I'm not sharing anything like super special, but this is what got us excited. So the idea is you go to all of these tech companies and you become like the obvious choice of where you should manage your cap table and where you should hold all of the shares in custody, right, with the company. So they go out and they do that, and they're almost like giving away the product for free to startups so that they get them on board, and they're kind of locked in for the duration. So that's step one. Get all of the equity on platform. Well, once you have all the equity on platform, then what you do is you go and you say, okay, you know what? We're going to launch a fund admin product. Now, fund admin, we actually use Carta, of course we do, because we're investors, but we're also customers. We were one of the very early customers of their fund admin product. And the fund admin is basically like the same thing for startups, but for investors. Like, they help us manage our ownership in all of these different companies. And so we have what's called an SOI, or a schedule of investments, and it breaks down all of our investments and how much we own in each one, and the shares and the value of those investments. And they help us with the accounting function of our firm and all of these things. And they do a phenomenal job. And a lot of it is that they were saying that their thesis was that up into this date, your options as a fund manager were you either hired a CFO, which was relatively expensive, especially for a small firm, or you hire one of these fund admin firms, which really was like still a bunch of people. And Carta was like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to build amazing technology that's going to automate most of this. And then we'll have dedicated people that will help the funds. But that one person, instead of just working with one fund, because of the technology, gives them leverage, and they can cover like a whole ton of funds. And so that's what they do today. And, like we're huge fans. I do customer calls for them all the time, and try not to be too biased about how great they are in terms of supporting the clients on the fund admin side. But if you think about this master plan, right? Well, now you've got all of these investors like us that are on the platform. And where are we holding our stock certificates? We're holding them in custody with Carta, right? But they're also managing our funds and so forth. And so now you've got the sellers of equity, the owners of equity, and you have buyers of equity, or in other words, sellers and buyers of equity, all on the same platform. And this is the grand vision of what is Carta X. Now, Carta X is designed to eventually one day become like the NASDAQ, but for privately held companies. And this is important because it used to be, like back in the 90s, during the dot-com boom, that companies would go public relatively quickly after getting started. So companies like Amazon and Google and Netscape, which was the first internet browser, and like a bunch of these tech companies, like they would raise venture money, and then like 2 or 3 years later down the road, they would go public at these like huge valuations on a relative basis. VCs would make their money, but then those companies would continue to grow, and eventually like become what they are today. And public investors could really ride that growth. It was like public markets were growth equity back in the day. Like VCs were like, here's the money to get the product going, get some customers. And then once you've proven out that like you have a product with customers that love it, then you go public and you raise growth equity, and then, you just grow. And so public investors had the opportunity to really enjoy a lot of the gains on the public markets. It's like if you put $1 into Amazon, you would have made like thousands of dollars today if you'd held it that whole time period, right? So one of the challenges you had was there are all these like new regulations that came out for companies that were going public, like reporting and other things to protect investors from things like Enron happening again, right? Where people were defrauded like millions of dollars. So you had all of this like additional regulatory burden. And startups are like, oh, it's even more expensive to go public and it's more of a hassle. We're just going to like push that back a little bit. So that happened. And then the other thing that happened is there was just like a ton of money flowing into venture and growth equity investing. And so investors would come to these companies and they'd be like, hey, you could go public, but you don't need to. You don't need to go through the hassle of being public yet. We'll give you the capital that you need at really good valuations. And so that just delayed further and further and further the amount of time before a company would go public. And it makes a ton of sense if you're one of these growth equity investors, because they're like, hey, look, if we had invested in the public markets and Amazon early, we could have generated this great return. But if you do it on the private market before they go public and you can keep them private, you can buy in at a much lower valuation. And so you can get an even bigger return over time. So, as a company, you don't want the hassle, and if as an investor, you want to get a little bit better deal. And so as a company, you could get the money you needed, so why go public sooner, right? So that happened. And so today, if you look at most companies that go public, by the time they go public, they're already like pretty well established. There's not a tremendous amount of growth still left in the business, at least on a comparative basis. And so what does that do? That means that companies, they used to take like, call it 3 to 7 years to go public. And today they take closer to like 5 to 15 years to go public. Well, if you're an employee at one of those companies, like you are locked up for that whole time period. And so, most employees are bouncing from startup to startup, and like you have to exercise your options, and that costs money, because you got to take money out of pocket to pay for the taxes when you exercise your options. And that's painful because you're not actually selling the options. And so, it can be really challenging. And so people are foregoing options and equity in the companies. Sometimes people are like really frustrated and they were like, would want to leave, but felt like they couldn't leave. Or they had left and they're like, look, I'm not even part of this company anymore. I don't know what's going on. I would love to just liquidate my shares. Then you also have investors. So people that invested in the very early stages of the company, they're pushing the company to go public as soon as possible or to get acquired. But the CEO and the later stage investors, they want to build something big, much bigger, and they don't want to get acquired now or go public now. Like they've still got like bigger fish to fry. And so you have like these asymmetries occurring at the board level where like the older investors are pushing for an exit. The newer investors are saying like not yet. The entrepreneurs like kind of caught in the middle. And so what the promise of Carta X and other exchanges that are trying to do this is that, hey, we can help be like a pressure valve on getting employees and investors some liquidity on their investment. And the advantage for investors that aren't in the business is that they look at it and say, hey, look, I would love to invest in this company now. Give me a way to invest. Even if the company's not raising, I can buy those shares from the employees and I can enjoy kind of that upside, right? And then the employee that sells out their shares, they can buy a house, they can put their kids through college, whatever it is, needs that they have. So that's the idea behind Carta X. And, once we understood that, we're like, this is like really smart because you basically build a monopoly of sorts over cap tables. You own that side. And then it's a natural extension to go to the investors because you already have all the cap tables. So it's really easy to connect up the two and give the investors like access to better information and like control both sides of that like ledger, if you will. So then you are able to have a real advantage relative to your competition because of the data to bring in more investors and basically build a bit of a monopoly there. And now you've got all of the owners, all of the buyers together in one platform to make it work. So look, Carta X is still in its early days. We'll see how it ultimately ends up working out. But it's been a phenomenal investment for us since we invested, back in the Series C, which I think was like back in 2016, if I remember correctly. Has been a super fun ride and huge fans of the company. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, check out my other video where I talk about our investment in Wyze and why I'm a huge fan of everything they do. Thanks.